Periscope. If you get a chance, go to YouTube, subscribe. Yeah, Turkey's helping Qatar. Yeah, the foreign minister, I think just an hour ago or something, made some notice. But yeah, get YouTube live, hit the like, hit the whatever, all that crap that you do. So maybe we can actually get some small benefit apart from sharing my knowledge with everyone, which I love, of course. Okay, so yeah, we have some underlying issues in Qatar. Number one, Qatar did not become independent until 1971. The people, the dictators or the monarchs, as you want to call them, they're from the family of Muhammad al-Thani, which means Muhammad II. The guy that's at the moment the leader took over from his father in a peaceful transition in 2013. Yeah, peaceful. No one knows what happened behind the scenes. Qatar is actually quite tolerant of its religious minorities, which are sort of the majority as well, because they actually out the immigrants. You know, I think the population of Qataris themselves are somewhere around 650,000, but the population of the whole country is like 2 million or something like that. So the first thing you see in the news when you say the reason that these other countries went against Qatar is because Qatar was funding terrorism. Now, is that true? Yes, that's the second part is true, right? Not the reason that they stopped dealing with Qatar, but is Qatar doing that? Yes. Well, Qatar, all of them are funding terrorists, right? So Saudiyin, the Saudis, and they do it for different reasons. And when I say all, I'm talking about the Gulf states, right? I'm talking Qatar and Saudi. I need to be more clear, more specific. The more now that I'm getting more people watching, so. We have the issue is that we have Qatar and Saudi, right? Firstly, before we talk about all of the rest, because all of the rest has something to do with Trump, because they've always, not Trump himself, but more the deep state, because American long-term policy has traditionally been consistent with Saudi and Egypt and Jordan. And you have to ask yourself, well, why is it that all of a sudden the same people are having now the same disputes with Qatar, and the excuse that they're using is an excuse that we know is bullshit. Now, how do we know it's bullshit? Well, we know that for how long Saudiyin have been funding the Islamists in Syria. And before the civil war, they've been doing that in Syria as well. So I have to talk quickly why Saudiyin want to do that. I'm not going to get into Egypt on this cast. But with Saudiyin is a very, 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 very dangerous place. And the reason is because they have a moderate government with an extremist population. So I'll say it again, it's a moderate government, extremist population. It's exactly the reverse of Iran. Iran has an extremist government with a moderate population. So over the long term, I mean, obviously we don't know what Trump and the CIA and whatever else knows, or their biases. But what we do know is that over the long term, which one is obviously more stable, right? The one with the moderate population or the one with the extremist population? So Saudi Arabia is a very dangerous place. And the people who took over Saudi Arabia from Al-Hijaz is what Saudi Arabia used to be called. And it was run by the Hijazi family. But then they were slaughtered and gotten rid of and taken over by the Saudiyin family, the Saudis. So it's like mob rule, right? Right, but here is the problem. The problem is that the population of Saudis is run by extremist imams. And this is sort of natural to expect, right? Because they have Mecca. And so the ones who adhere most literally to the doctrine are the ones who are going to have the most authority. And so how this is metastasized into an extremist population is possibly or potentially self-evident, what I would suggest. So here we have a powder keg, right? If the Saudi government undermines its own population, they will get massacred. And if they get massacred, ISIS type will take over Saudi Arabia. Because Saudi Arabia on the ground is run by ISIS types. Like, you would probably find that 1 in every 2 people are sympathetic to ISIS, if not more than 1 in every 2. Right? Because they're basically same name, different smell. You know, that's a polite way of putting it. ISIS in Saudi Arabia, the way that the people run and the way they live, it's virtually identical, right? You just change the names and stuff like that. All right. So this is a problem for Saudi Arabia because they have to look like they are helping terrorists to keep their population down, because the population know that the leaders are corrupt, because you see it a lot, as you've seen on my other scopes, where it just comes out in behind the floodgates of Saudi men and even some women just saying how they're disgusted with the leadership. All right, so the leadership has to, of course, look like they're doing some bad things. And so, they buy weapons from the US, as does Qatar. So US is making money on both sides. And both of them are sending weapons to rebel Islamist regimes or little groups around the Middle East. But of course, they're sending them to competing ones. So the Saudi Arabians have been sending ones to those who led up the rise in ISIS, where Qatar was sending them to those who took over Gaddafi in Libya, right? And they put money into her foundation. So it's all tied into one big mess. So we know, for example, the excuse that that Saudiyin were using, saying that they want to stop Qatar with the terrorism thing. We know that that's bullshit, because Saudi Arabia have been doing the same thing. So the question is, why are they doing this? Well, we don't know why. We can't know why, right? If you're biased towards Trump, you're going to have one view. If you're biased against, you're going to have another. But what we can do is look at the various data and think, okay, well, what are the potentials, right? From what we know, right? From what we know. So what do we know? Well, we know that Qatar has an unstable society, number one, for different reasons to Saudi. So Saudi has an unstable society because of its extremist population. Right, so it has to sort of do extremist things once in a while, like it murders atheists, or assassinates, or what do you call it, hangs, not hangs, that's Iran, but kills homosexuals, kills atheists, all these. It doesn't let women drive, these type of things, because if they did, right, they would get slaughtered by the population, right? Whereas in Qatar, they traditionally have an extremely tolerant view, and this is Middle Eastern standard, not Western standards, right? But for Middle Eastern standards, they have a very tolerant view of other religions. So they allowed the building of a church a few months ago. And this I saw on Arabic news, right? Because my father is a part of that faith, the Maronites, which are a Semitic people, which basically dominate Lebanon. And they're predominantly Christian. And they set up a church. Now, the thing is, in Sharia, it's illegal to repair a church or build a church is even worse. Repairing a church is bad, but building one, that's a disaster, right? So Qatar is doing that, which is very strange, right? And that's going to put them at odds with Saudi Arabia. So of course, Saudi Arabia can't, welcome back, Saudi Arabia can't be seen to be approving of that type of thing, because then Saudi Arabia's population is going to rise up. So that could be one factor, right? The tension between the two. The other problem is that Qatar is a country, when you say America's a nation of immigrants, no, Qatar is a nation of immigrants, right? Almost all people, I think 3 out of every 4 people in Qatar is an immigrant, right? And they're not an actual citizen, right? They've come in mostly from India, from Nepal. They're predominantly Pakistan and Bangladesh. And they are basically the ground who do everything, right? And I've been to Qatar, and I can tell you now, I think I saw, maybe out of every 100 people, I saw one native, right? Because they're, of course, in their high towers and they're working high-class jobs. So you don't see them, right? And it's the same. A lot of Lebanese Maronites are there too, actually, as engineers. And the same thing, I didn't see them either, because they're sort of supervising all of the lower type of engineers. So they get their churches and they get all of these things. So there is a problem with reproducing over there and finding women, because most of the immigrants that come in are young men, because all of the jobs are construction jobs and heavy duty jobs, and so they come in and stuff like that. So the question is, what's the future of Qatar? All right, that's another variable. All right, so that's 2 variables I've mentioned now with Qatar. The third variable we have with Qatar is that it's very close to Bahrain, and it's very close to Iran, right? And it's right on the edge of Saudi Arabia, right? And it's a nothing compared to Saudi Arabia. But even though it's a nothing in size, it owns the 3rd largest gas reserves in the world. Right? It's hard for us to even comprehend. We think of the world like the US, like China. This is Qatar. It's like this big, right? And compared to Saudi Arabia, it's like that. It's almost like the little mole that comes off your belly button when you're born, right? It's like so small, right? But it's so powerful. It is so powerful. And it has risen. That's the other thing that scares Saudi Arabia, right? Hello, namaste. Qatar is unbelievably powerful. It's powerful because of its political system and the way that it's designed itself. So it's come from nothing, right? It was one of the poorest countries in the Middle East to now one of the richest and most successful. And it's on par with Saudi Arabia. They use the rial, and the rial is one of the highest currencies in the world, right? And this is a problem for Saudi Arabia, right? Now, their tolerance is a problem, as I said, for reason number 2. But for reason number three, their problem is if they could become an economic power in the Middle East, that's going to off-balance Saudi Arabia's power, right? So that's another problem. So why is it that, you know, we have a problem with them funding all of these other terrorists? Well, that's the part that I find is fake news. That's bullshit. Because it's true that they're funding terrorists, but it's also true that Saudi Arabia is funding terrorists. Why don't they mention that? Right? Why is that always at the bottom of some random news article somewhere else? Right? These are the major things I see with Qatar as the problem. So getting hard on Qatar is not really going to do much. I think that's probably going to exacerbate the problem. Now, why is Turkey supporting Qatar? Well, Turkey is benefiting from ISIS, and Qatar is funding militias that have been helping bring down the Syrian government, which of course is helping ISIS. Right? So they also have been funding Hamas, and Hamas, as we know, took over democracy. Sorry. They took over democracy, and as soon as they were elected into power, they then wiped out democracy, murdered everyone else, and they've taken over and turned Palestine into bankruptcy and beggary. Right? So Hamas did that, and this is one of the faults that lies in democracy, and this is a problem that comes back to us in the West. Democracy is not the ultimate thing. The ultimate thing is justice and the rule of law. Democracy comes after those two, because demographic shift. So in Qatar, for example, 70% of the population. I actually, sorry, just a moment. I've been getting some chats here, so I'm actually going to open the live chat on Google. Sorry, bear with me. I won't be too long. I forgot how to do it. Hold on a sec. Edit video manager. Sorry, 10 seconds. Sorry about that, guys. We're talking about Qatar. I was translating for you. The Arab guy. It's now no longer appearing. Let me go back to live stream. Look, if I can't do it in the next 20 seconds, is that why Saudi is quoting? Go live chat. Is this working? Let me just, for the guys, forget it. It's not going to work. Forget it. I give up. Yeah, Qatar. Center photo. Okay. Live now. All right. I'm sorry. I'm really sorry. I delayed it. See, I lost some people over it. Yeah. Ah, the chat's here. There you go. You're good. Thanks, man. Test. All right. If anyone's on YouTube, you'll see the live chat. So I've got a few chats. Live control room events. Anyway, whatever. I don't know. Forget it. 2 watching. Oh, okay. We've got 2 people now. I can't see myself anymore on YouTube. Yeah. So I like when you say why, that, you know, this is true news. True news cannot tell you why, right? That is the thing. I can tell you all of the variables that I'm aware of, right? And I would consider of those variables and obtaining of those variables to be maybe slightly more cohesive, you know, maybe more advantageous, I guess, my access to information. But I still might only know 1%. We don't know what the deep state knows, right? So we can only just put the pieces together. Well, that Qatar used democracy to turn Palestine into a backward state. But Qatar under the table is also dealing with Israel. Why is that the case? Who knows? Is it a position of leverage? Is it that they know that they control Hamas and they're supplying Hamas all of these weapons that they bought from the US, right? So that's a problem, right? We also have Turkey is now helping Qatar. Well, there's multiple reasons why Turkey want to do that, right? Turkey, of course, is going to want to take advantage of this situation like anyone would in the Middle East. Why would they not want to do that? And if they can come in on the side of the underdog to undermine the Saudiyin, well, that helps them, especially now that Saudi officially have now turned against ISIS. This is a problem for Turkey, of course, because Turkey is benefiting from ISIS significantly. Turkey and Syria are not friends, right? Turkey, there was a news article I saw 10 years ago in Arabic news, and it was that Turkey had rejoined the Islamic Brotherhood. Right now, that's a very interesting phrase, and the question is, why did that not make the West? Does anyone see that as quite bizarre? It actually did not make the West. So anyway, we're back live again. I've read and understand. Before you join, should understand. We'll now be able to watch you. Okay, got it. Whatever. Join. Okay, we're back in. Take me there. All right, so we're back live again on YouTube. Anyway, so as we said, we know that there was a news article in Arabic news that came out 10 years ago, and it said Turkey had rejoined the Islamic Brotherhood, right? So that Turkey's interests does not lie with Syria, because Syria is not in the Islamic Brotherhood. Syria was a secular state, and so therefore was an enemy. Syria was a target waiting to be taken down. Syria was hated by Saudiyin, the people, right? The people hated Syria because Syria was and is, up until I was there in 2012 when it was taken over by the rebels. It was a secular state. It was the best you could hope for in a bad situation, right? They were even, I mean, Israel was able to get back for them as Julan, what you call the Golan Heights. They were able to tame them slightly. The secular government was the best killing machine. And I know this sounds terrible, but Saddam Hussein, as evil as they were, Saddam Hussein and Bashar al-Assad's father were the ultimate anti-heroes for terrorists. They could kill terrorists like, you know, you'd be having tea for breakfast, they'd be slicing up terrorists. They were so good at killing terrorists. They were the best thing against terrorism that we've seen on the face of this planet. What they would do, they dedicated their lives to defeating terrorism. And that is not a good thing, because what we consider terrorism, most Saudi people, the actual on the ground, consider them freedom fighters, right? Because they are following the literal interpretation of the Quranic doctrines, including a Sirat al-Nabawiyya, which is the way of the Prophet, the life of the Prophet. And they recognize a hadith, which a lot of secular people don't recognize. A hadith is the plural of hadith, which are the sayings attributed to Muhammad. And they are handed down to us today by what? Aqa'id. Aqa'id are, it can mean indoctrination, it can mean ideology, but in this case it can mean necklace, but in this case it means a chain. So there is a chain of my father was told by his father, was told by his father, and they were all reputable, so therefore we appreciate what was attributed to Muhammad through the ahadith. Now, secular people don't recognize that, right? So a lot of even secular Muslims, like in Syria, say, look, all right, here's the Quran, all right, fine, we're going to go with that, but the rest of it, you know, is bullshit, right? So we don't recognize the ahadith, in a lot of ahadith where it says kill homosexuals and all that stuff. But the mainstream purists, the Wahhabiyyin and the Salafiyyin, they recognized these as pure. So Syria is going to be their enemy. And because now when you put that together with Turkey joining the Islamic Brotherhood, the Brotherhood of Islam, then you know that Turkey is going to be against Syria. It's not in their business, right? The other thing is that Syria, being helpful to minorities, right, was not going to be as hard against the Kurds, right, as Turkey would be. And Turkey hates the Kurds just like they hated the Armenians, right? The Armenians were a growing force, and so they slaughtered them. And the same with the Kurds. The difference between the Armenians and the Kurds is that the Armenians followed the Christian faith, which did not allow them to fight back with the same veracity as the Kurds, who are predominantly Sunni Muslim, are able to do, right? So the Kurds are able to fight back beautifully, right? Because, and I say it's because of, you know, less inhibitions in there. You look like Corey Good. Okay, thanks, man. I don't know who that is, but sure. I look better, way better on Periscope than Facebook. So if I look bad on Periscope, mate, God help us all on YouTube. Sorry, YouTube, not Facebook. Alrighty. So these are the underlying currents which are affecting the situation. So now we have Turkey coming in, because Turkey, of course, it's not in Turkey's interest to be now friends with Saudi Arabia, especially now because we have the Turkish government, which is the Islamist government that's taken over in the last 10 years. It has actually been benefiting from the existence of ISIS. So they're going to come in, weaken Saudi Arabia. That's basically the situation. These are the three biggest reasons that I can tell you that I see, right? So the first one we have is we have the unstable Saudi Arabia. Number two, we have the unstable Qatar, right? And the fact that it's surrounded by, it's really close to Iran. Like you can see Iran from Qatar. When I was in Qatar, I can see Iran, like it's just over the water basically, right? And then you've got Bahrain, and you've got Qatar as the rising power since 1971, and they've gone ballistic, right? Their supremacy in the region is unsurpassed, right? And that's because they have a very progressive I mean, we'd still call them backwards, but relative to around the region, they have an extremely progressive population, extremely progressive, right? As I said, they allow the rebuilding of churches, which is banned in most Muslim countries. The rebuilding of churches and the construction of new churches, that is one of the most mortal sins you could do in a highly Islamic orientated country, right? A purist Islamist country, right? So in Iran, for example, Iran allows Jews and Christians to be represented in the government as minorities. Now, in the Middle East, that's like far left as you can imagine, right? But at the same time, they hang homosexuals. So, but that's now, and then they actually fund Hezbollah, and that's why half of the Christians support Hezbollah in Lebanon, because they're sort of like, well, at least these guys don't want to murder us, right? This is sort of the choice that you have in this situation. What's going to happen? Well, the instability is great for the US. So will it keep going? Probably. I mean, why wouldn't it, right? It benefits the US, and I can't speak on the deep state's behalf, but what I can say is that the US sells weapons to both countries. Now, you just have to look at that, right? Like, if I'm selling weapons to you and your brother and you're killing each other and I'm sitting back selling the weapons, what do you think everyone else in the Middle East is going to think, right? So, of course, that's another reason to hate the US, but not that it matters, right? Yeah, but it's brilliant for the US. I mean, can you imagine if that whole place was just one region, right? And they became sort of like a super state? That would be a disaster for the US, right? They'd have so much power. They'd be able to wipe out Iran. And the thing is, it goes the other way as well, right? Iran, right? It benefits America, right? And I'm not saying America deliberately wants this. I don't know them. They have obviously, all of their intelligence. They have a combined IQ of like 1 million, right? So I can't compete with that, right? We can't compete with that. But shit, I think it's gone. Yeah, it's gone. Gone.